What's the bigger risk, 10 years invisible or 10 years light? Don't answer yet. Sit with it for a second, because most people have never actually been asked this, so they've never had to answer it honestly. They just drifted into whichever one was easier and called the drifting a choice. Invisible sounds like failure. It sounds like the years nobody claps for, the messages that went unanswered, the room you weren't in when the room mattered. Light sounds like success. It sounds like the seat saved before you even walk in, the reply that comes back in minutes instead of days. So the instinct says, obviously, avoid invisible, chase light. That instinct has been trained into you since you were small enough to notice which kids got picked first for the team, and nobody ever sits you down as an adult to audit what you absorbed by accident at age 9. You just keep running on it. Here's what the instinct skips. 10 years invisible builds something, slowly, where nobody's watching closely enough to laugh at your first attempts or correct your form. 10 years light spends something, a little of you. Trade it off in small increments just to stay comfortable in rooms that were never fully yours to begin with. One is a savings account, compounding quietly while nobody checks the balance. The other is a subscription you forgot you were paying for, drafted out of your account whether you use it or not. By the end of this, you'll know which one you've actually been living and which one you still have time to switch. Here's a rough way to picture the trade-off. Worth saying plainly up front, this is an illustration, not a formula. If you try to measure your actual hit rate on anything in life, you'll get a number that means almost nothing because the inputs aren't countable in any honest way. Treat what follows as a shape, not a statistic. Picture two people with similar starting talent. One says yes to almost everything, pitching, applying, posting, showing up constantly, and most of it goes nowhere, but a small fraction lands. From the outside, this looks like hustle. It looks like a full calendar, which people are trained to read as evidence of seriousness. The other says yes, rarely. They spend the bulk of their effort before committing to anything, filtering hard so that most of what they do agree to actually works out. Same raw material, wildly different math. The first person burned a long string of attempts trying to prove something to an audience that forgot the proof 5 minutes after seeing it. The second spent their effort figuring out what was worth attempting in the first place and then simply kept being right because the filtering happened up front instead of after the damage was already done. Here's the part that stings if you sit with it. The busy one gets the applause. People love a full calendar. Look how much you're doing is visible, countable, easy to compliment at a dinner party. Nobody claps for the quiet no's that never happened where anyone could see them, the offer turned down, the collaboration walked away from because it looked fine on paper and wrong in the stomach. But being impressive to watch from a distance and being good at the thing are not the same claim, no matter how similar they look from far enough away. You can run a looser version of this almost anywhere, and it's worth being honest that it gets messier the closer you look. Dating, where volume gets mistaken for being valued, and 100 forgettable dates start to feel like proof of desirability instead of proof of low standards. Job hunting, where 100 blind applications feel like effort, but a handful sent to places actually worth working at tend to move faster and land better because the thinking happened before the sending instead of after the rejection. Making things, 100 pieces, chasing whatever's trending that week, get decent engagement and vanish by morning, while the handful made, because you actually needed to make them, are the ones strangers still find years later, because something true doesn't expire on the same schedule, a trend does. Self-worth runs on a version of this too, and it's the one that's hardest to see from inside your own head. You can spend years agreeing out loud with opinions you don't hold, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, showing up as the smoothest, least threatening version of yourself in every room, and land a real but shallow rate of approval from people who are never actually looking at you, only at the performance you are putting on for their benefit. Or you can say the true thing far less often, get quietly written off by the part of any given room that only ever wanted the show, and end up with something smaller in volume but load-bearing in a way the first version never is, your own opinion of yourself, which is the only opinion in the room. Every single morning, including the mornings nobody else is around to ask. One honest caveat, Since it's easy to turn this into a tidy little parable about how quality always beats quantity, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the person saying yes to everything is the one who stumbles into the thing that actually works, precisely because they tried enough different doors that one of them happened to be unlocked. Filtering hard is not a guarantee either. It's just a different bet with a different failure mode. The filterer's risk is spending months preparing for an opportunity that never arrives. The volume player's risk is burning out before the unlocked door shows up. Neither one is the safe option. There isn't a safe option here. There's just the one that tends to leave you with a self you still recognize at the end of it, and the one that tends not to. Write this down if nothing else survives the rest of it. Being everywhere is not the same as being someone. Before the hill, the public stand, the thing you defend out loud, there's usually a quieter thing underneath it that nobody sees at all, the private work of actually becoming someone who has something worth standing on. Think of it like a house, half built. No roof yet, no heat running through the frame, just exposed beams standing in the cold, and you sleeping on the plywood floor of it, because it's the only thing in the world that's actually yours outright. You don't get to keep both the finished borrowed apartment and the house you're building by hand. That's the part nobody mentions at the start, because if they did, most people would take one look at the open frame in the rain and go rent the apartment instead, which is exactly what most people quietly do, and nobody would blame them for it either. The detail that trips people up most, the frame doesn't look like progress. A finished apartment looks like something. A half-built house with no roof looks like a mistake to anyone driving past it, and it only stops looking like a mistake once it's finished, which means for a long stretch in the middle, you're the only one who believes it isn't one. That's not a flaw in the plan. That's the plan working as intended, even though it feels, for most of the time you're living inside it, like evidence that you've made an error nobody's told you about yet. You'll be tempted, somewhere around the coldest part of that stretch, to go rent the apartment back. It's always available. That's what makes it a rental instead of a house. Nobody will stop you, and nobody will think less of you for it, because from the outside, it'll simply look like a reasonable decision. Only you will know what the frame cost you, and only you will have to live with knowing the roof never got built. She was 26. $41,000 saved, every cent of it earned doing a job she was quietly competent at and completely dead inside, doing every day she showed up to it. Good insurance. A manager who liked her. A title that made her mother's friends nod approvingly at dinner parties without a single follow-up question. She quit anyway. No backup offer waiting. No second income lined up. Just a plan to stretch $41,000 across roughly 14 careful months while she figured out the rest. The plan didn't survive contact with reality, and it's worth being honest about that instead of skipping to the part where it works out. In month 4, a freelance client she'd quietly built half the entire plan around simply stopped answering. No explanation, no closure, just an email thread that ends mid-conversation and never picks back up. That single hold tore through the runway. 14 months of careful math collapsed into something closer to 7, and she didn't fully understand how badly until she sat down with an actual calculator instead of avoiding the number the way she'd been avoiding it for weeks. By month 7, she had $11,000 left, a full year ahead of schedule in the worst possible direction. She sat on the floor of a smaller apartment she'd moved into specifically to stretch things further, staring at a balance she barely recognized as her own, doing the math over and over. Her mother didn't speak to her for 6 weeks, not out of cruelty, out of fear, which is harder to argue with than cruelty, because fear isn't trying to be right, it's trying to keep you safe. And safe looked exactly like the job she just walked away from. Her closest friend sat her down gently and told her she was throwing away the best thing that had ever happened to her. He meant it kindly. He also wasn't wrong about the risk, only wrong, as it turned out, about the outcome. Neither of them had any way of knowing that yet, and it's worth sitting with the fact that plenty of people in her exact position, making her exact decision, do not get his prediction proven wrong. One person stayed the entire way through without pretending to believe in the plan. Her sister, who said flatly, more than once that she thought the whole thing was out of her mind. And then, on a night when she was trying for the third time to explain the spreadsheet as if the explanation itself would make her sister worry less, cut her off mid-sentence with the line that still repeated between them, word for word, "I don't need to understand it to know you're not stupid." That sentence wasn't trying to inspire anything. It was just loyal, and loyal turned out to matter more than encouraging most nights. Month 9, something small happened that didn't reveal its significance until much later. A woman she'd done a tiny unpaid favor for months earlier, back at the old job, sent one email introducing her to someone at that woman's company. No promises attached, no expectation of anything coming back. That email turned into the first client that didn't vanish the way the month 4 one had. It didn't fix the runway overnight. It just proved that not everything was going to disappear. 18 months after she quit, the business crossed 6 figures for the year, and none of that is worth dressing up as a cinematic overnight turn, because it genuinely wasn't one. It was 14-hour days that started before anyone she knew was awake. It was months 11 through 15, the hardest and least photogenic stretch, which barely get mentioned even now because nobody wants to hear about the middle of a story, only the ending. Now, the part most versions of the story leave out, and the part that actually matters more than the 6-figure number, this is not proof that quitting works. Her friend's warning described a real live version of events, the one where the month 9 email never arrives, where the number hits 0 before anything catches, where the story just ends quietly with an ordinary return to job listings and a slightly awkward line on a resume about the gap. That version happens constantly to people who did everything right, filtered exactly as hard, worked exactly as many 14-hour days. Some of them read this exact kind of story beforehand and used it as evidence it would work out for them too. It didn't. That's not a flaw in their character. It's the actual shape of the bet, which nobody sells you accurately because it might not work and you'd have no way of knowing in advance, doesn't make for a satisfying ending. And the invisible years don't only pay off in the shape of a 6-figure business, or not at all. There's a wide, unglamorous middle that almost never gets told as a story because it doesn't have a clean before and after. Someone runs the exact same experiment, spends the exact same kind of years building something quietly, and it doesn't scale into a business at all. It turns into a skill that gets them hired somewhere better than where they started. It turns into the clarity to go back to something closer to the original job on their own terms this time, with a floor under them that wasn't there before, because now they know exactly what they're capable of surviving. None of that photographs well. None of it becomes a story anyone tells at a dinner party. But it's not failure either, and treating it as failure, did it turn into a headline number, as the only test of whether the invisible years were worth it, is its own kind of dishonesty, just aimed in the opposite direction from the one her friend was worried about. There's a memory from month 13 worth more than any of the milestones. A former coworker from the old job ran into her at a grocery store, asked how things were going in the polite, slightly guarded way people ask when they've already decided you probably regret the decision and are just being kind about it. She told the truth, which at that point was still mostly uncertain. Some months good, some months rice for the 4th night running. No clear proof yet that any of it would hold. The coworker nodded, said something encouraging, and they both went back to their shopping. Standing in that aisle afterward, something unexpected showed up. Not doubt, not vindication, just a strange, quiet steadiness. She didn't need the coworker to believe it was going to work. She only needed to still believe it herself on the days nobody else was around to ask. What the years since actually prove is narrower than it worked out, and it's worth holding on to the narrower version instead of the tidy one. Staying would have guaranteed she never found out. Leaving didn't guarantee anything at all. It just made finding out possible, and possible was never the same thing as promised. There's a feeling most people carry every day that doesn't have a name yet, so it's worth giving it one. Call it the rented reflection, the face you put on, because it's easier for other people to be around than the real one, and the lease quietly renews itself every time you open your mouth and agree with something you don't actually believe. You already know the rented reflection? You've worn it nodding along in a meeting to a direction you privately think is wrong. You've worn it laughing at a comment that actually stung, because correcting it in the moment would have cost you the peace of the room. You've worn it in a relationship, making yourself smaller and quieter than you actually are, because the real size of you made someone else nervous, and keeping them comfortable felt at the time like the price of being kept around at all. It's a specific kind of tired different from ordinary exhaustion. You're not tired from being disliked. Disliked is clean. You can walk away from it with your dignity intact. You're tired from being liked as someone you're not, because every compliment aimed at you is actually landing on a stranger wearing your face, and some quiet part of you knows it the entire time, even while you're smiling and saying thank you like you mean it. Quick, low-stakes gut check. And it's fine. Genuinely fine. Almost everyone's answer is yes. If the honest answer is more often than I'd like to admit, when's the last time you felt a small wave of relief the second someone left the room because you finally got to drop the expression you were holding up for them? That relief is the tell. That relief is rent quietly coming due again. Eviction from the rented reflection is a decent working definition of self-worth, actually. Not confidence, which is just a mood. And moods change with sleep and weather and how your skin looks in the mirror that particular morning. Self-worth is colder and simpler than that. It's refusing to keep paying rent on a face that was never yours, even when eviction means the room sits a little empty for a while, and even when some of the people who like the rented version stop calling once the real tenant moves back in. Most people never move out, not because they can't afford to, but because the rented reflection is the only address anyone's ever sent mail to, and an empty inbox is scarier than never being known at all. Worth being deliberate here? Just two? Held on to a little longer than usual, instead of a parade of new ones that would each get less room to actually land. The skillet. Brand new cast iron is ugly, dull gray, sticks to everything, ruins the first few meals no matter how carefully you follow the instructions on the box. A non-stick pan, by comparison, is smooth on day one and steadily worse after scratched and flaking by year two, thrown out and quietly replaced by an identical one that will fail on the exact same schedule. The cast iron skillet is worse on day one and unmistakably better by day 1000. Black, glassy, seasoned through use rather than handed to it by a factory, eventually passed down instead of thrown away. Nobody claps for a skillet mid-season. Nobody walks into your kitchen in month 3 and compliments how rough and unfinished it still looks. It just sits there, unimpressive, quietly becoming the only pan in the house anyone actually reaches for. And it can be ruined, washed too aggressively, left wet, neglected in a drawer for a year, and the seasoning strips back off, leaving something that looks new again but isn't because stripped starts from behind new. That's what going back to the rented reflection after you've started building something real actually costs. Not a reset to zero, but a setback past it, because now you also know exactly what you gave up to get there. The hill. Not a dream. Dreams are soft. They bend across a long enough dinner with the right tone of gentle concern. A hill is the one thing you'd stand on even if everyone below you was shaking their head, tapping a watch, telling you it's time to come down now. You've made your point. Most people have a preference dressed up in a hill's clothing and find out the difference only the first time it costs them something real. A friendship, a job, a reputation among people they'd claimed for years not to care about. One rule on this, and it's non-negotiable. Don't burn your name to keep the hill warm. A hill isn't worth anything if you had to lie to get up it or step on someone smaller to plant the flag. That's not a hill. That's a hole with a nice view, and you'll know the difference the first quiet night you're alone with exactly how you got there. Hills look different depending on who's carrying one, and none of them are guaranteed to work out either. That's worth saying about this metaphor too. So it doesn't slide into the same tidy parable trap as everything else here. For someone, holding the hill costs them the job. For someone else, it costs them the family business built on a shared, unspoken lie. Some hills get more expensive the longer you hold them. because the people around you get used to the version of you that folds. And the first time you don't fold, it lands as a betrayal instead of a boundary. That's not always a sign you picked the wrong hill. Sometimes it's the clearest sign you picked the right one. But sometimes, honestly, it's just a hill that cost you something and gave nothing back. And there's no formula that tells you in advance which one you're standing on. So, the question we opened with, 10 years invisible or 10 years liked? Liked is rented, and the lease eventually comes due. And if you never once said no to the wrong room, you look in the mirror one ordinary morning and don't quite recognize the face you've spent a decade paying monthly rent to wear. Invisible cost you a kind of applause you were never going to keep anyway, since applause never keeps, no matter how loud it was the night you got it. Neither path is guaranteed to end anywhere good. That's worth saying outright instead of just implying it and hoping the story did the work for you. Some invisible decades end in something you can point to. Some just end quietly, with nothing to show a stranger at a dinner party, and still leave the person who lived them with something real underneath. The floor of knowing exactly what they're capable of surviving, which the like decade never quite gets you, no matter how comfortable it stayed, entire way through. Nobody is coming to flag which decade you're currently in the middle of. There's no notification for it, no year-end summary. You have to check the math yourself, honestly, which is most of what this was actually about. Find your hill. Keep your name clean the whole way up it. Let the quiet years be enough for you even when the room only ever claps for the busy ones. Let the skillet look rough in month 3. Let the house sit unfinished through a few cold winters nobody drives out to see. None of this gets applauded while it's happening. That's not a warning, it's just the actual terms of the deal. And you're allowed to sign them anyway, eyes open, no illusions about how quiet the middle is going to be, and no promise attached that quiet always turns into something loud later. Stop paying rent on the rented reflection. Move into the one you actually own. If that meant something, there's more of this on the channel. Subscribe if you want it.